Wyoming Territory, 1882. The train hissed into the dusty station in Rollins, wheels shrieking like they hated what they were being dragged into. Tamar Ellison sat stiff in her seat, gloved hands folded tight in her lap. Her chest ached from holding her breath too long, and the weight of her mother's last letter felt like a stone in her handbag. She was promised to a stranger, a man her father had picked out in a business deal gone dry, one with land but no wife, and a temper known to flatten cattle. His name was Malcolm Hart, 40 years old, twice widowed. No children, but not for lack of trying, as her father had said with a bitter laugh before putting her on the train. "You'll be safer with him than starving back east," he had said. Now here she was, 21, corseted and cornered, stepping off into a town that smelled of hay, sweat, and sunbaked wood. Her boots hit the platform just as a tall man in a brown hat and dust-covered coat stepped in front of her. Not Hart. Younger. Leaner. Eyes like a storm trying not to break. "I'll do better," he said. She blinked. I am sorry. I know you do not remember me. Maybe you would not even if things were different. But I remember you, Tamar." His voice was rough, but not sharp. "You were 12. I was 15. Your family came through our ranch near the Platte River. You let my little sister ride your mare." Tamar's breath caught. She did remember. The boy with the crooked smile and burnt hands from helping his father mend fences. He had given her a carved wooden bird before they left. "You are Elijah Vance," she whispered. He nodded once. "I heard what your father did. I rode hard to get here before Hart showed up." "Tamar, I do not think you should go with that man." Her throat tightened. "I do not want to. But I have no money. No people here. And I cannot go back." "You do not have to," Elijah said. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his dark, wind-tossed hair. "I got a ranch about 15 miles west. It is not big, but it is mine. My sister lives with me. She is married now, got 2 babies. You would be safe there. You would be wanted." "Why would you do this?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Because I remember the way you smiled when you rode. Because I remember thinking no one had ever looked at me like I mattered, until you did." He swallowed. "And because I will do better than what you have been given." Tamar looked past him, down the platform where a man in a black coat and red necktie stepped off the last car. Broad shoulders, grizzled face, cold eyes scanning the crowd. Malcolm Hart. Her fingers gripped Elijah's coat sleeve. "Take me with you, please." He did not hesitate. He slid his arm around her waist and led her down the far end of the platform, away from Hart. They cut around the back of the station, Tamar holding her skirts up to keep pace. Elijah's horse was tied near the freight yard. Without a word, he helped her up, then climbed behind her. They rode out fast, the wind pulling at her hair, the sun dipping low in the western sky. She did not ask where they were going. She only leaned into him, felt the heat of his chest against her back, and let herself breathe for the first time in weeks. By the time they reached the Vance ranch, dusk had settled. It was no manor house, just a 2-room cabin, a barn, and a corral with 2 horses and a sleepy goat. But the porch light was warm, and the woman who stepped out to greet them looked like kindness made flesh. "Elijah," she said, brow creased. "What is going on?" "This is Tamar Ellison," he said. "She is staying here. I will explain everything inside." Tamar stepped down from the horse, legs shaking. Elijah's sister caught her gently by the arm. "I am Nora," she said. "Come inside, honey. You look like you have been running from the devil himself." "I have," Tamar said softly. "But I think I outran him." That night, Tamar slept in a bed with clean sheets and a window that opened to stars. She stared up at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of a baby crying and then settling again. Somewhere nearby, Elijah moved through the house, quiet and steady. In the morning, he brought her coffee, set it on the table without a word. She looked up at him. "You meant it, did you not?" He met her eyes. Every word. She nodded once. "Then I will stay." Over the next days, Tamar learned to move as part of the ranch. She helped Nora tend to the goats, held the baby while dinner cooked, and walked the fence lines with Elijah. He never pushed, never asked for more than she could give. But when she laughed at something he said, his whole face lit up like he had waited years to hear that sound. One afternoon, she watched him from the porch as he split logs behind the barn. Sweat rolled down his back, and his shirt clung to his shoulders. He paused, catching her gaze, and something passed between them, quiet, certain. Later, after the sun had dropped low again and the babies were asleep, Elijah found her outside. She stood under the cottonwood tree, arms crossed. "You still afraid?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just waiting to see if I can believe in good things again." He stepped closer. "You can start with me." She looked up. "You said you would do better." "I will," he said. "Every day? For the rest of my life, if you let me." She reached for his hand. "Then do it with me beside you." He wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned into him like she had always belonged there. The wind moved through the grass, and in that quiet, Tamar knew she had not just run from something terrible. She had run toward something right. The last of the frost lifted from the grass 2 mornings later. Tamar stood barefoot at the edge of the creek behind the barn, her hem pinned up with clothespins Nora lent her. She watched the water pass over stones smooth as worn bone, her arms crossed to keep the chill off her skin. Elijah leaned on a fence post nearby, a coil of wire slung over one shoulder. "You always up this early?" "I slept light," she said, without looking his way. "Dreams don't know when to quit." He nodded, adjusted the brim of his hat. "You ever learn to mend a fence?" She turned to him. "No, but I'd like to." He tossed her a pair of gloves. "Then come on." They walked the boundary line in silence, the soft clinking of wire the only sound between them for a while. Tamar watched his hands, the way they moved with certainty, quick, sure, but never rushed. She mirrored him until her fingers found the rhythm. "You taught yourself this?" she asked. "My pa taught me before his lungs gave out." Elijah twisted a staple into the post. "I kept it up after." She squinted at the horizon. "I was taught piano and French. Neither worth much out here." His voice was quiet. "You're worth something." She didn't answer, just kept working until her palms ached. When they reached the last corner post, she leaned against it and pulled off her gloves. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" He looked toward the hills. "Thought about it once. Then I saw what the rest of the world looked like. Too many people talking fast and meaning little. Out here at least, when the wind comes, you know it's real." She brushed a curl behind her ear. "I don't know what I thought this place would be." "Nothing ever matches what we imagine," he said, picking up the spool again. "But it might give you something better." That afternoon, Nora sent them to the dry goods store in town. Tamar rode behind Elijah, arms wrapped around his middle, the dust rising in warm clouds behind them. She hadn't been back since the day she arrived, and the buildings looked smaller now, less like a threat, more like a place with corners. Inside the store, Elijah tipped his hat to the shopkeep, a stocky man with red cheeks and a crooked tooth. "Morning, Mr. Allen. Need flour, salt, and blackstrap molasses." Tamar moved through the aisles, trailing her fingers lightly across the shelves. On one stood bolts of fabric, rough cotton, and faded calico. She paused at a dark blue one with tiny white flowers. "You sew?" Elijah asked, coming up beside her. "I can," she said, "but I haven't in a long time." "Pick what you like." Nora's been meaning to make new curtains, anyhow. Tamar hesitated, then chose the blue. As she turned, she caught sight of a man by the pickle barrels. Tall, black coat, red tie. She stiffened. Elijah followed her gaze. His jaw set. They left quietly, Elijah steady but sharp-eyed. Once on the horses, he handed her the parcel. "He won't get to you. I won't let him." She nodded, clutching the cloth in her lap. "I believe you." Back at the ranch, Nora was kneading dough in the kitchen, flour streaked across her cheekbone. She looked up as they came in. "You two all right?" "We're fine," Tamar said. "I found something for the windows." Nora smiled. "Good." That old fabric's been sun-bleached to nothing. That evening, Tamar sat on the porch with a needle and thread, the blue fabric spread across her lap, her stitches small and even. Elijah joined her after chores, his shirt damp at the collar. He didn't speak, just settled into the rocking chair beside her with a quiet creak of wood. After a while, she asked, "You ever been in love?" He looked out at the pasture. "Not till you stepped off that train." She kept her eyes on her stitching. "I don't know how to be what a man like you deserves. You don't need to be anything but honest. That's more than most give." She set the needle down. "I'm trying. I see that." He leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees. "You're not what I expected, Tamar. You're more." The wind stirred the curtains behind them. She folded the half-finished panel, her fingers brushing his as she stood. He caught her hand gently, thumb running over the ridge where the needle had pricked her skin. "I can wait," he said. She looked down at him, her voice steady. "I don't want you to." He stood then, slow and sure, and they stood facing each other in the porch's hush, the last of the light painting the grass gold. When his lips touched hers, it was not rushed. Just the meeting of two people who had carried too much alone, finally finding a place to rest. Inside, the baby cried. Nora's footsteps crossed the floor. They pulled apart with a breath, eyes still locked. Tamar whispered, "Let's keep building this." Elijah nodded once. "We will." The high plains wind came early that morning, dry and restless, rattling the window panes before sunup. Tamar tied her hair back with a strip of muslin and stepped out into it, the porch floor still cool beneath her soles. She crossed to the barn quietly, not wanting to wake the rest of the house. Elijah was already inside, brushing down the chestnut mare. The lantern hung from a nail, casting a low amber pool over the hay-strewn floor. "You're early," he said without turning. "I couldn't sleep," Tamar replied, stepping in and taking up a curry comb. "Thought I'd be useful." He handed her the brush without a word, and they worked side by side, the silence between them touched only by the mare's steady breathing and the rustle of straw. After a while, Elijah spoke. "I was thinking of building a fence out by the east pasture. Keep the young ones from wandering too far." Tamar glanced at him. "You're planning on expanding?" "Eventually," he said. "If things hold steady. Maybe take on a few more head. Could use the help if I do." "You thinking of hiring someone?" He looked over, his eyes soft beneath the brim of his hat. "I was thinking of asking you." Her hands stilled on the mare's flank. "I mean it," he said. "You've taken to this life better than most born into it. You see things others miss. You finish what you start." She leaned against the stall's beam, brush still in hand. "No one's ever said anything like that to me. Not where I come from." "I ain't them," he said. "I know." Her voice caught, just slightly. "I've been trying to find a place to put all the grief I came with. Working helps." He nodded. "Work's the only thing that ever steadied me." They walked back toward the house together, the first light catching the frost on the grass like sugar. Nora was already at the stove, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a kettle beginning to steam. "You two get an early start," she said, not looking up from the pan. Tamar set the comb on the washboard shelf by the door. "I wanted to learn how Elijah trains the younger horses." "Then you'll want to see what he's doing after breakfast," Nora said. "He's got that roan colt near broke, but he kicks like the devil when he sees a feed sack." Elijah poured coffee into 3 tin cups. "That's because you fed him too sweet," he said, sliding one toward Tamar. Nora shook her head. "He's stubborn, just like you." Later that day, Tamar stood in the round pen, one booted foot on the lower rail, watching Elijah move with the colt. He didn't shout, just whistled low, hands loose, body angled calm. The horse circled, then slowed, then turned in hesitant, but curious. "He trusts you," Tamar said. "He's learning to," Elijah answered. "Takes time." "Patience." She climbed the rail and sat on it. "You always this patient?" "No," he said, "but some things are worth slowing down for." When the colt finally stopped and pressed his nose to Elijah's shoulder, she smiled not because of the horse, but because she recognized herself in its caution. And in the way Elijah never forced anything, just waited for the moment to come on its own. That afternoon, while Nora napped with the baby, Tamar took a basket and climbed the ridge above the house. Wild chokecherries grew along the slope, and she picked them slowly, letting the juice stain her fingers. The sun warmed her back, and the wind carried the distant sound of Elijah hammering a post into the earth. She hadn't written her father, had no intention of it. Whatever he'd promised Hart no longer concerned her. She owed that man nothing, not the one who'd sold her, and not the one who'd come to claim her. Her life was her own now, stitched together from quiet mornings and small kindnesses, built hand over hand like a fence line. When she returned, Elijah was in the garden, turning soil. She set the basket on the step and walked toward him. "Chokecherries," she said. "I thought maybe Nora could make jam." He leaned on the spade, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "She'll like that." Tamar stepped closer. "You meant it, about this being my place too?" He looked up at her, the sun in his eyes. "I never say what I don't mean." She took the spade from his hands and drove it into the dirt. "Then show me how to do this right." He stepped behind her, one hand guiding hers on the handle. Start with your weight here, he said, gently pressing her boot into position. Let the tool do the hard part. She nodded, focusing on the feel of the earth giving way beneath them, the rhythm of the work. By the time the shadows stretched long across the yard, a neat row of turned soil lay before them. Elijah looked at her, a quiet pride in the curve of his mouth. You did good, he said. She brushed a strand of hair from her face. I think I'm starting to believe that. That night, as the lanterns flickered low and the sky deepened to velvet, Tamar stepped onto the porch alone. The stars above felt closer than they ever had in the city. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and sat on the top step. A few minutes later, Elijah joined her, 2 mugs in hand. He passed her one without a word. They sat in silence, shoulders touching, the quiet between them full and whole. Elijah, she said softly, her fingers curling around the warm tin. You ever think about what you want 5 years from now? He took a long sip. I do now. She turned toward him. I want a home that holds, he said. One that isn't built on fear or debt. I want someone beside me who doesn't flinch when things get hard. Someone who chooses me, same as I choose her. Tamar's eyes didn't leave his. You already have that. He reached out and laid his hand over hers. Then I reckon I've already got everything I ever hoped for. They stayed like that until the air cooled and the night wrapped itself around them, quiet and sure. The river swelled with meltwater come late May, tugging at its banks with a steady insistence. Tamar stood at its edge with her skirts tucked up, her boots sinking into the soft earth as she gathered smooth stones for the garden path Elijah had begun laying. She cradled them in the crook of her arm, feeling their weight against her ribs, the way each one held a story only the water could tell. Back at the house, Elijah was fitting the last beam into place on the new chicken coop. His shirt clung to his back, the wood dust pale against his forearms. Tamar watched him from the ridge as she returned, the stones pressing into her side, and for a moment she let herself see the shape of the life they were quietly building. He looked up when she stepped into the yard. You haul all those yourself? I didn't think the chickens would mind muddy stones. She shifted the weight into a basket near the porch. They'll keep the path from sinking when the rains come. Elijah brushed his palms together and came closer. You've got an eye for what holds. Tamar tilted her head. I thought I might try planting something near the porch. Something that blooms late. What kind of thing? I don't know yet. She looked toward the fence line. But I want roots here, even in the flowers. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing hers. Then we'll make room. That evening, Nora hung damp linens on the line as the wind died down. The twins napped inside, and the quiet felt earned. Tamar knelt in the garden bed, pressing seeds into the turned soil with care. She didn't ask what they were. Nora had handed them over with a knowing look and said only, they'll surprise you, if you're patient. Elijah leaned against the post nearby, watching her work. You always this good with your hands. I had to be, she said without glancing up. When you don't have much, you learn to make what you need. He crouched beside her, resting his arms on his knees. You ever miss city life? Not once, she said. But I do miss silence and company, the kind where no one's waiting for the other to talk first. He nodded. I know that kind. She pressed another seed into the earth. You've had to carry a lot, haven't you? I tried not to, he said. But it finds you anyway. They stayed like that until the sun dipped below the bluffs and the sky turned lavender. When Tamar stood, her hands were streaked with soil, her dress damp at the knees. Elijah reached out and brushed a thumb across her cheek, just beneath her eye. She didn't flinch. You leave the city behind like a coat you outgrew, he said. I didn't leave it, she replied. I walked out of it. The next morning, the 3 of them rode into town together. Nora had a parcel to mail for her husband's family near Laramie, and Tamar wanted to see if the mercantile had linseed oil for Elijah's gate hinges. As they hitched the wagon, a woman stepped out of the post office, a widow from the edge of town, known for her sharp tongue and sharper memory. She eyed Tamar's plain dress and sun-browned arms, then looked to Elijah. So you finally brought her out proper, she said. Tamar looked back without blinking. I came out honest, she said. The woman huffed and turned away, but Elijah's hand found the small of Tamar's back as they stepped inside the store. She doesn't matter, he said low. I know, Tamar answered. But I do. Later, as they passed the livery, Elijah paused. I've been thinking of trading the roan colt. Tamar raised a brow. You just finished breaking him. He's too restless. Not a good fit for farm work. I'd rather have something steady. You could have made him into what you needed. Elijah shook his head. I'd rather work with what's already willing. That night, they sat beneath the cottonwood again. The air was warm enough. Tamar had braided her hair back and left her shawl inside. Elijah passed her a tin cup. She looked over the dark fields. When I came here, I didn't know what I wanted. Just what I didn't. What do you want now? She turned to him. A home where I can speak plain and be heard. A man who doesn't mistake silence for weakness. A life that doesn't feel borrowed. He reached for her hand. Then let's make that life. Her fingers threaded through his without hesitation. I already started. The wind sighed through the grass, and the porch creaked gently behind them. For the first time in years, Tamar didn't feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. She was already where she belonged. The morning of the wedding dawned with a hush, no wind, no birdsong, just the soft breath of the plains holding its own kind of reverence. Tamar stood beneath the cottonwood tree where she and Elijah had shared their first promise. Nora was behind her, fastening the small row of buttons down the back of her cream dress, her fingers steady, her voice gentle. Simple's best, Nora murmured. You always did carry yourself with enough grace to make a threadbare dress look like silk. Tamar didn't answer at first. Her hands were folded in front of her, thumb brushing the edge of the small blue ribbon she'd sewn into the hem herself. I didn't think I'd ever want this again, she said quietly. Not after everything that came before. Wanting isn't weakness, Nora said. Wanting a man who's earned you? That's strength. Outside, Elijah stood near the fence line, tugging at the cuffs of his shirt. He'd borrowed a coat from Nora's husband, one a little too broad in the shoulders, but clean and pressed. His boots were polished with bacon grease and an old rag, and his hair lay flat for the first time Tamar had ever seen. He looked like a man who'd come through fire and found something worth staying alive for. The man who would marry them arrived on horseback, an older circuit preacher who'd known Nora's in-laws and passed through once every few months. He said little, just nodded to Elijah and removed his hat, brushing the dust from his coat. Tamar stepped outside, the hem of her dress catching lightly on the porch boards. Elijah turned at the sound, and his breath left him before he could speak. She met his gaze without hesitation. Her shoulders were square, and the corners of her mouth turned up just enough to say she was walking into this with her whole heart. You ready? He asked. I've been ready since the day you remembered me, she said. They stood beneath the cottonwood, the preacher's voice low and firm. Nora held her youngest child on her hip, the older twin clinging to her skirts. A few neighbors had come, quiet folk who didn't need invitations, just a nod and a place to sit. No music played. No decorations waved in the breeze. But the sky was clear and the land wide and open, and that was more than enough. When the preacher asked if they'd take each other, Elijah didn't hesitate. I already do, he said. Tamar's voice didn't tremble. So do I. There were no rings, just the clasp of hands and the weight of shared truth between them. When Elijah kissed her, it was slow and sure, and Tamar leaned into it like she'd finally stepped into sunlight after a long winter. Later, Nora brought out bread and cold chicken and rhubarb pie. They ate beneath the tree, the babies sleeping on a blanket nearby. Elijah stayed close to Tamar, his hand never far from hers, his eyes always coming back to her like she was the horizon he'd been riding toward all his life. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Tamar traced the grain of the porch railing with her fingertips. Elijah joined her, the wood still warm beneath their hands. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. I think about waking beside you every morning, he said. About building a house with a proper root cellar, putting in more apple trees. Maybe one day, a child who smiles like you do when you're hiding something. She laughed, the sound low and sure. I'd like that. He leaned his shoulder against hers. You made this place feel full, Tamar. Before you, it was just land and work. And now it's home. That night, they lay in the bed Elijah had built with his own hands, the window cracked to let in the scent of wild mint. Tamar curled against him, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder. I used to think safety meant being small, she whispered. You're not small, Elijah said. You're the strongest thing I've ever known. She touched his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. I'm not afraid anymore. "You never needed to be," he said. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, the quiet outside matching the peace inside. The years that came after were not without hardship, calves lost to cold snaps, fences torn by wind, a dry season that cracked the earth in long, aching lines. But the house held. The apple trees grew. In time, a son was born, then a daughter, both with Elijah's dark hair and Tamar's steady gaze. Nora and her husband moved further west after the railroad reached Rock Springs, but they rode often, and when the children were old enough, they visited in the summers. Tamar taught them to read by lamplight, and Elijah showed them how to cut a clean line through the prairie grass with a scythe. The blue fabric Tamar had chosen for the curtains faded over the years, but she never replaced it. She said it reminded her of the sky that first day she let herself believe in better things. They grew old together with hands worn by work and hearts softened by time. Tamar never returned east. She had no need to not, when every sunrise brought Elijah's quiet smile and the sound of their children's laughter tumbling through the fields. And when the wind came through the cottonwoods in the evening, it carried with it the memory of that first ride away from the train station, how it felt to choose a different life and find not just safety, but love. A love that was built, not promised. One that lasted. One that held. Forever.